Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning at Focus Forward, our virtual conference with our partners at Royal Bank of Scotland. My name is Stuart Patrick. I'm Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, and I'm your host for this morning. This is actually the second of two events that we've held with the Royal Bank of Scotland. In November last year, we came together with a panel of experts to explore Glasgow in the COVID-19 world. We discussed the effects of COVID-19 on the city's economy, and we asked what should be the policy asks of policymakers as we battled the crisis. And we've been pursuing and achieving many of those asks, like, for example, the establishment of a city centre task force ever since. This morning, fingers crossed, and of course, there's always going to be one or two little bumps along the road, but we are finally beginning to emerge from the crisis. So we felt it was time to look forward. And we think the most important thing for us to be looking forward to is what could be a pivotal moment in Glasgow as we prepare to host the COP26 summit in November 2021. We will therefore focus this morning quite heavily, not exclusively, but quite heavily on the climate change challenge, which impacts us all and will be undoubtedly the conversation of a generation. So this morning we will explore the role of business in addressing the UK's national and the Scottish national and the Glasgow local net zero targets. How as a city we can build the right business and economic models to foster business growth, attract business investment, develop talent, whilst at the same time tackling our net zero challenge. Just as a little bit of quick housekeeping, you can ask questions today in the Q&A section, which is located to the right of the screen. If you can use this section rather than the chat function, it allows me to view the questions you're asking in one place. And we do have some questions that were submitted in advance, so I will certainly be posing some of those. We have an expo with stands from Royal Bank of Scotland, Circular Glasgow, Glasgow Chamber Employability Team, and Glasgow Chamber of Commerce itself. So please do visit that during the breaks or after the event today. You can follow the chat and share your thoughts using the hashtag #FocusForward. Now, to get our session underway, I'm delighted to introduce Malcolm Buchanan, Managing Director, Corporate and Commercial Banking at Royal Bank of Scotland, and also Chairman of the Scotland Board. Thank you, Malcolm. We're delighted to be working with you. Over to you.
Thanks, Stuart, and good morning, folks. It's great to be here, and thanks for so many of you joining us. Just picking up on what Stuart said, I guess I, like everybody else, is desperately hopeful that we're emerging once and for all from COVID, but we're now facing into an even bigger crisis. And despite the news headlines that I heard this morning on BBC and ITV, the crisis is not the chances of foreign holidays or who's on travel lists. Climate change is undoubtedly now widely accepted as the single biggest challenge of our time. And for the bank, climate is central to our purpose-led strategy. Now, you may ask, why is this so important for a bank? Well, in simple terms, bringing it close to home in Scotland, we support 1 in 3 businesses in Scotland, 1 in 4 households, and we provide 1 in 7 mortgages here. So we've got a huge stake in the sustainability, the future sustainability of our economy. But it's not only a Scotland issue. As part of Natwest Group, we are very concerned about the sustainability of the whole of the UK economy going forward. Now, there's a huge amount for everyone to do. We've all got a part to play, and we've got limited time to act. So solving the crisis will be very challenging. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I also believe it will create some opportunities. I think about new jobs that may occur that we can't see today. I think the transformation in how we live and work, partly COVID, but partly how we're changing for that sustainable future. And I think the chance to make a greener future part of how we recover from COVID is a really important issue today. And I think recovery from COVID and the greener future are not mutually exclusive objectives or outcomes, and that in itself creates great opportunity. On a sort of personal level, if I'm being brutally honest, the more that I learn about climate change, the more my head hurts, actually. And sometimes recently I've felt quite overwhelmed when I think about the scale of the challenge. and how I as an individual or me as a leader in Royal Bank of Scotland can make a difference. And I'm sure that many other people feel the same way. And that's why I'm really delighted that we're involved in this event today with our friends at Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. I think it's a great opportunity to learn from leading experts who are already deeply involved in driving change, and it will help us all find practical ways of doing our bit to deliver a more sustainable future. As Stuart mentioned, we're just a few short months away from COP26, which is a huge deal for Glasgow, and as a Glaswegian, I'm incredibly proud that the city's involved in it. And I'm also really proud that my bank will be the banking sponsor. Both Natwest Group and Royal Bank of Scotland will feature. And we want to help people and businesses in Scotland and the wider UK tackle climate change. We can't stand by and wait for other people to do it. And the way that we'll do that is by providing access to the financial resources and the expertise required to enable individuals, businesses, and communities to transition. And I'm not going into the detail of the progress that we've made so far or our future ambitions. I'll leave that to my colleague James Kloss, who's one of the speakers later on. Now, in a moment, I'll pass on to Paul Little, Principal and Chief Exec at Glasgow City College. But I wanted to finish my opening remarks by saying I hope everyone finds today's event really informative. I hope it's thought-provoking and that it motivates you to get involved in driving change if you're not on that journey already. I think if we can all find new ways to make lasting change, big or small, to our carbon footprints, as a result of today, the totality of everybody's efforts will make a real difference. And I think the event will be a success and it will move us towards a more sustainable and greener future, which is good for everybody. So I hope you have a great day. I think the programme looks fantastic. Thank you very much for being with us, and I'll pass over to you, Paul.
Good morning, everyone, and I would like to add my thanks and welcome to you all as not only the Principal of Scotland Super College, but as President of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. And thank you, Malcolm, once again, and thank you, Royal Bank of Scotland, for your remarks and indeed for the partnership. It's great to work with you again, and I'm also looking forward to hear from the inspirational words from your fellow speakers this morning. Stuart reminded us that as we emerge from this crisis, and as Malcolm reminded us, we are looking at the potential crisis of a climate emergency. We're very fortunate that we're in Glasgow. We're fortunate because we are on the cusp of hosting COP26 in November of this year. And we will do the UK presidency proud, and we will certainly do Glasgow proud. We know that people make Glasgow, and the people on this Focus Forward conference today will be many at the heart of the planning for that particular conference from a Glasgow perspective. And of course, whilst there are many challenges ahead, there are certainly many more opportunities ahead for our business community as we embrace this very important green recovery and this just transition to net zero or carbon neutrality. COP26 offers us a major opportunity to spotlight our city, our wonderful Glasgow city, on the world stage again, to key opinion formers, to those from the international community, and indeed to world leaders as they descend on Glasgow shortly after the summer. Now, many on this call will know that Glasgow Chamber of Commerce has begun the work of tackling from our metropolitan area this climate emergency some 5 years ago. And we did so with Zero Waste Scotland and the Glasgow City Council and experts from the circular economy. And we produced a concept called the Glasgow Circular Initiative. Now, some of you will know that in detail, some of you might not know that in detail. And this Glasgow Circular Initiative positions our city as a leading city by encouraging business to embrace innovation, to embrace design, and indeed to embrace circular thinking in a very practical way, a very real way that has a lasting impact on our citizens and our metropolitan area. This initiative has certainly put Glasgow on a global platform. It's showcased Glasgow to key opinion formers such as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, to opinion formers in the C40 Cities Alliance, in the European Investment Bank, and indeed to many other cities as they follow in our footsteps to a more circular future. In fact, Glasgow Chamber of Commerce has received important recognition for this circular initiative from no less than the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2017, and subsequently we went from highly commended to a finalist in 2019 for our work in the circular economy. You know, this pioneering work has also inspired our colleagues in the city. And along with Glasgow City Council, one of our key partners, they produced a circular economy map for Glasgow. So I'm proud to say that on Earth Day last month, Glasgow became the first city in the United Kingdom to sign the Circular Cities Destination. We've also taken major steps elsewhere in the UK. We partnership with London to encourage business-to-business practice and also in sharing circular business models. You know, further impetus from this circular initiative came recently when we signed a very important strategic agreement with Glasgow City Council. And together we will work on stakeholder engagement, on business engagement, on developing international circular links, on an education legacy for many generations to come. I'm therefore delighted that on the call and speaking this morning is the leader of the city, Councillor Susan Aiken, as one of our early keynote speakers. And she knows that this agreement will help improve the business benefit to your city, the profile, the spend, and indeed deepen the relationships for future investment and future trade. Colleagues, as we move in this pandemic through different stages, from very important and urgent stages of saving lives to what I believe shortly will be the next stage to saving livelihoods, and then over the next decade to saving life chances, I think we must intensify our collective efforts in a skills-led recovery for Glasgow and indeed for Scotland. So we're very fortunate that our city is blessed with many world-class tertiary institutions. One of those is my own City of Glasgow College. But right across the city, between our universities and our colleges, we are trying to mitigate the learning loss from the past year, to help mitigate any skills regression, to help reboot social mobility, and indeed to mitigate the scars of the long-term economic harm from this pandemic. So I think together the business community and our tertiary institutions can help many of those depressed economic sectors that we as a city know only too well: tourism, hospitality, retail, aviation, and indeed many more. I think, colleagues, as you sit back and enjoy the session this morning, and you will hear the insights from many expert speakers in various panels, from climate change right through to business leadership, and how collectively in partnership we can all try and do our bit for this climate emergency. Shortly I'll be handing over to Alex Sharma, the president of COP26, and then after that to James Kloss, head of the climate change at our important partner, Royal Bank of Scotland. But first, I'll hand you back to our Chief Executive, Stuart Patrick, and I trust that you will have a great morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. And I sympathise particularly with Malcolm's view that his head hurts. I think we have indeed got quite a lot of head-hurting moments to go through in the weeks and months ahead, but we are confident, and we've got a packed agenda today. As Paul said, we've got speakers this morning, including James Kloss, Head of Climate Change at Natwest Group, and Councillor Susan Aiken, who will soon be up, who's leader, of course, at Glasgow City Council. We're going to have some panel discussions on the topic of COP26 itself, climate change, of course, but also the role of business leadership in the decade ahead. And finally, a look at how innovation and disruptive technologies in the city are already making an impact. However, to open proceedings, I'm delighted to welcome a contribution from the Right Honourable Alok Sharma MP, who was appointed full-time president for COP26, the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference in January this year, having previously been Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. In addition to his role as president, he's chairing the Climate Action Implementation Cabinet Committee to coordinate government action towards net zero. Now, Alok is travelling the world for COP26 and he's coming to Glasgow tomorrow. So sadly, we've just missed by a day, but he is in being able to participate live this morning. But we did catch up with him earlier in the week, and he has the following message for us today.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. In less than 6 months' time, the eyes of the world will be on Glasgow, as world leaders and country delegates arrive for the UN Climate Conference, COP26. This will be a major moment for the planet and the city. This will be the biggest summit the UK has ever hosted, and one which critically will shape the future of our planet. Glasgow was selected as the COP26 host city thanks in no small part to its green credentials. You aim to be carbon neutral by 2030, and initiatives like Circular Glasgow have garnered international attention. And we're determined to hold the summit in person, and I hope and expect it will have a positive impact on local business, whilst of course at the same time showcasing the achievements of Glasgow and the UK to a global audience. As COP26 President, I have one very clear aim for the summit: to get the world on track to make the goals of the Paris Agreement a reality. That is the international accord world leaders signed in 2015 on how to address the existential threat of climate change. The agreement includes a critical commitment to limit global average temperature rises to well below 2 degrees Celsius, whilst pursuing efforts to limit the rise to 1.5 degrees. And to achieve that, the world must reach net zero emissions by the middle of the century. And businesses, of course, have a vital role to play in delivering that goal. When the UK was announced as the host of COP26, less than 30% of the world economy was covered by a net zero emissions target. Today, it is 70%. Yet delivering this target depends on action across the real economy. So I'm urging all businesses to sign up to the Race to Zero campaign. This is a United Nations campaign that commits organizations to reach net zero by 2050 at the latest. And crucially, it requires short-term targets based on science to take you there with robust short-term action by 2030. So that net zero is not just a vague aspiration, but a concrete plan. And of course, UK businesses are leading the way here. Nearly a third of the UK's largest companies have signed the Race to Zero campaign. In fact, 25% of the companies signed up to the Race to Zero campaign are British firms, including companies we're delighted to have as our COP26 partners like SSE and Scottish Power. Joining the Race to Zero is not only good for the planet, it is good for the bottom line, showing customers and investors that you are serious about climate action and that you're determined to seize the enormous opportunities presented by the move to clean economies. The world needs innovations, technologies and solutions to reach its net zero future, which businesses can provide. Thinking ahead prevents companies from being stuck with outdated, polluting practices as the world transitions to clean, sustainable ways of working around you.
Thank you.
I'm urging all companies to join the Race to Zero campaign ahead of the summit, including, of course, the great businesses located in Glasgow. Because when COP26 kicks off in November, when the eyes of the world are on Glasgow, let them see that this city's businesses are leading the way in helping to create a clean, green future for the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Alok, for that. You can be sure that we're going to be keeping in close contact with Alok in the lead up to the conference in November, and we'll be looking for some update on progress in the summer. So let's move on now to James Kloss, Head of Climate Change at Natwest Group. James has spent his career working at the interface between the public and private sectors. He's now committed to working on sustainable development and climate change. He's the Head of Climate Change at Natwest Group, and a member of the Energy and Natural Resources Advisory Group for the ICAEW. And prior to this role, he was the head of the Circular Economy Programme for London, and also held the role of Director for Climate Change at the World Bank. James is going to get us underway this morning by sharing how the bank itself is addressing the climate crisis and his thoughts on how Glasgow can create a legacy from hosting COP26. James, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stuart, and good morning, everybody. And I really am looking forward to being with you all, hopefully in Glasgow in November. And I think it's going to be a fantastic opportunity to get together and really press home the ambition that the Paris Agreement has set for us on our trajectory towards a low carbon future. And of course, it's also a wonderful opportunity to enjoy some of the amazing architecture of Charles Rennie Mackintosh and also celebrate the life of Adam Smith, as well as really celebrating some of the amazing work that's been going on in Glasgow to be a leader on climate change. Of course, Glasgow already has a name associated with this COP. The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero is a coalition of asset managers, asset owners, and banks who are working together to ensure that finance is mobilised for climate action. And it's led by former Bank of England Governor Mark, launched a couple of weeks ago, and we as Natwest Group were absolutely delighted to be one of the founding members of the Banking Alliance for Net Zero and to have our CEO join the launch event with leaders in climate change like Mike Bloomberg and John Kerry. And of course, this is our way of signing up to the race to zero, which is at the heart of our commitment to be a leading bank on climate change. We've set ourselves a target of reducing the climate impact of our financing by half by 2030. And we've also put our own house in order by delivering net zero emissions across our own operations. But really, for me, this is all about mobilising our balance sheet in a way that supports businesses. And I'm really delighted to be teaming up again with the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce and also thinking about Circular Glasgow based on the work that I did with Advanced London, which was a partnership we convened between Glasgow and London to promote circular economy principles. And I think the circular economy is just a really important aspect of this transition as we rebuild the business models of the future that enable us to reduce our carbon emissions and live in a more sustainable and viable way. Of course, there are other areas as well where Scotland has got a fantastic leadership position. For example, in renewables, we are also a leader in financing renewables, and we've been delighted to work with Scottish and Southern Energy in financing Dogger Bank, which will be the world's largest offshore wind farm when it's built. We're also leaders in green bond financing, and mobilising green bonds is a really important way of getting the capital flowing towards green related initiatives. So we're not only are we financing green, we're also greening finance by making sure that we're able to understand the emissions intensity of every single lending operation that we undertake. And we're the first bank to have done that analysis for 4 sectors, which we presented in our climate report this year, and we'll be continuing that work for the remaining sectors. And this will give us a really good analytical base to help support the decision making that we need to undertake. And we want to do this as well in partnership with our clients, which is why we're working with Microsoft to make available very high quality carbon footprinting software that is going to enable businesses to understand their footprint and do something about it. And our research shows that 88% of businesses really want to do something about sustainability, but more than half don't really know where to start. So giving them the support and data that enables you to start thinking about that in a concerted way is going to be really important. And of course, this is going to be central to the recovery that previous speakers have spoken about. And hopefully many of you will have seen the Springboard to Recovery report that we did for small, medium-sized enterprises to scale up their businesses with respect not just to climate change, but also to fintech and to B Corps, all of which are really an important part of linking the economically, socially and environmentally viable future that we aspire to the financing that's going to be required to make it happen. So I'm delighted to be with you this morning. I'm really looking forward to the discussions. We have a lot to do in the run-up to COP, but of course a successful event at the COP will only count if we can take what we do there and translate it into action post COP. So we have great ambition, and we're here to support you as our clients and to make the very most of the green recovery that is going to be so important for our economic future. So thanks very much indeed, and look forward to seeing you all in Glasgow.
Thanks very much, James, for taking us through that presentation this morning. I'm particularly struck by the point you make that 50% of the businesses that are keen don't know where to start, and I think that is something we are especially alert to here at Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, and I know that's your objective, is to try and do something about that, so we're very keen to work alongside you on that. Now let's turn to Glasgow itself, and I'm now delighted to welcome Councillor Susan Aiken, who's the leader of Glasgow City Council and the leader of the host city contribution to COP26. I'm sure most of us this morning will be very familiar with Susan, having worked with her over the 4 years in her capacity as leader of the council. Under her leadership, Glasgow has been named, of course, the host of COP26, named as a global green city, and actually European Capital of Sport in 2023. She was awarded the Scottish Local Government Politician of the Year for her work to deliver equal pay justice for thousands of women in the city. Susan, I know, has set out a genuinely ambitious plan for how Glasgow can make its contribution to net zero as the eyes of the world turn upon us. So can I now turn to Susan? Over to you.
Morning, Stuart. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted to be involved in this first Focus Forward event alongside such great speakers, addressing some of the most critical and pressing challenges and agendas that we've got in front of us. I think the timing for this first event, it really couldn't be better. Across Scotland, there's a really tangible, I think, intent and momentum building around the climate emergency, but also a growing appreciation of what our COP26 host status can mean for this city. And of course, exactly 6 months from today, exactly 6 months, we want to be waking up to global headlines proclaiming the Glasgow Agreement, that the world's leaders have declared their agreed plan for a safer, fairer and more prosperous future for our planet, and that they've done so right here in our dear green place. The Glasgow Agreement has a very good ring to it, I'm sure you'll agree. What actually happens in those negotiations and what agreement emerges is, of course, to a significant extent out of our hands. But what's in our gift is making sure that the city grasps the rewards of the global profile and visibility that COP has given us. And if I have one message for the audience today, it's that the opportunities emerging from hosting COP extend far and beyond staging an event for 2 weeks in November. The changes that the transition to net zero will demand from our city, its communities and our business base are not going away anytime soon. This isn't a fad or a political whim. The climate emergency is the global, national and local priority. And over the past 6 months, I've engaged with scores of city leaders from every continent, and every one of them speaks of the pressing need to grapple with these challenges now and in the longer term. What Glasgow has, however, and what those others don't, is COP. And events don't come much more totemic or significant. We are perhaps the world's most talked about city this year. And that, I'm not sure, is fully appreciated just yet here at home, which is entirely understandable, given that we're only just now emerging from the tragedy and devastation of the COVID pandemic. But it will, and very soon. As a city, we've got to be ready to turn that attention into opportunity, to attract the investment that will naturally be drawn to the city of COP. And we've got to ensure that this talented, innovative and globally connected Glasgow has the best opportunity possible to become a pioneer in the green economy, a global demonstrator for where the solutions to the challenges of sustainability are to be found. The 1990 Year of Culture and the 2014 Commonwealth Games were milestones in Glasgow's long-term recovery from the despair of deindustrialisation. But as our economy and communities begin to rebuild and renew after the pandemic, COP can be the catalyst for much more. It can be the defining moment in the story of modern Glasgow. Perhaps the best way to illustrate the emerging international view of Glasgow as COP host and the potential impact of that is to give you a flavour of that engagement and the themes that are emerging from the discussions, the international discussions of the past few months. I think there's still a sense out there, maybe here locally more than anywhere, of why us, why Glasgow, why is the future of the planet being decided in the west of Scotland in November? Well, there are many reasons, not least our track record in successfully hosting big international events and the excellence of the SEC as a venue. And as the president of COP, Alok Sharma, just said, Glasgow's ambitions and policies around sustainability are also what gave us the edge in winning being a host. But the central theme of our engagement is that Glasgow isn't just a good choice of host. We are the ideal COP host, and it's our imperfections that make us such. Glasgow's got such a compelling story that we don't always appreciate. That journey from the cradle of the Industrial Revolution, the workshop of empire, through post-industrial decline, near abandonment even, and now our re-emergence in recent decades, our resilience, our recovery, and indeed our standing head and shoulders as a global city. But we're also a city that still contends with the legacy of our past, both in terms of the physical scars and the social impacts. And that makes us a template for many cities that are on a similar trajectory, but which haven't yet reached the stage that we did in the 1980s, and of course hope never to do so. It resonates so strongly within those international discussions where our peer cities recognise something of themselves, and it adds real substance to what I said just a moment ago, that Glasgow can be a city where the solutions to the challenges of sustainability can be found. The critical role of cities, which is another central theme for COP26, has also thrust on us our responsibility to ensure that the voices of the world's cities are heard in November. Cities like Glasgow are where the greatest challenges to both COVID recovery and the climate emergency lie, but also where the greatest gains are to be found. Glasgow simply can't achieve its net zero or indeed its COVID recovery ambitions without the lead of its economic powerhouse and biggest population centre. And we aren't unique. This is a fact that's as applicable here in the Glasgow metropolitan region and in Scotland as anywhere else in the world. While nation states will pledge in November, it's cities like Glasgow that will deliver. And as the role of cities in the climate emergency is recognised, so too is the need to invest in them as crucibles of change. And Glasgow can take much of the credit for forcing people, rather than just targets, projects and pledges, to the forefront of the international discussions. I've made clear throughout all of our engagement that COP and everything that it's becoming shorthand for needs to be relevant to the lives of ordinary Glaswegians. Climate justice and social justice are as relevant in Glasgow as anywhere. The relevance to this to our business space is something I'll come to shortly, but the centrality of citizens and of social justice and social equity in the climate emergency has been adopted by the UN-affiliated local government and municipal authorities constituency, which will negotiate on behalf of local government at the COP26 as part of its roadmap to COP, and they're calling it the Glasgow message. So we're making that international mark already, even before the summit takes place in November. And the nature of our international engagement is also changing. It's now much more about substance and action than concepts, commitment and solidarity, crucially important though they are. And increasingly, Glasgow is being thrust to the forefront. If you're picking up on the messaging coming from global leaders just now, global leaders like the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and his climate envoy, John Kerry, it's that COP26 has to be the COP of action. Whatever is decided in Glasgow in November, it must be about the practicalities of achieving net zero. And it's about how those interventions needed to deliver that really have to be put in place, scaled up or accelerated within the next decade. Here in Glasgow, we've got an emerging plan for what those interventions will look like. And to give you just a flavour, it's retrofitting tens of thousands of residential and business properties to address the source of over a quarter of our emissions and to make buildings much more energy efficient. It's about building a Clyde tidal barrage, mitigating flooding and unlocking currently vacant land for development, harnessing the renewable energy potential of our river. Our riverfront remains Europe's biggest regeneration opportunity, but it needs an intervention like that to realise that potential. It's about putting in place zero carbon heat networks, accelerating plans for the new metro to better connect communities and reduce private car use and the emissions that they generate. It's about putting in place the infrastructure for electric vehicles. It's identifying nature-based interventions across our communities, whether that's tiny forests or local food growing. What we're talking about really amounts to a rebuild of the very systems on which urban centres like Glasgow have been built and on which we depend. So, who's stumping up the multiple billions of pounds, euros and dollars that all of this is going to cost? Because with the best will in the world, we cannot rely on government alone at any level to either fund transition or deliver it. Private finance and the private sector are absolutely critical. There are, some of you might be surprised to hear, major opportunities for Glasgow in sourcing that finance. New dynamics in the world of finance where the value and security of investing in cities and in their modern economies are feeding into new conversations around the funding of transition. Along with the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, major philanthropic organisations like the Bloomberg Foundation and other city leaders, most particularly my counterpart in Bristol, Mayor Marvin Rees, Glasgow is currently at the vanguard of these early discussions within the UK, contributing to the shaping of discussions around the levers that cities need, what good looks like to investors, and having our propositions in a state of readiness puts us in an excellent position. This is a relatively new space for everyone involved, but it's moving very quickly, and perhaps an update specifically on this later in the year to the Chamber or to a wider audience through a platform like this would be helpful, because this agenda is moving very fast. What I can tell you now, though, is that my council colleagues are preparing a prospectus, a green investment prospectus, spelling out the case for Glasgow that we'll take out to the world of potential investors this summer. As well as that shopping list of green, low-carbon, investable infrastructure projects, we're also pitching our reputation as a centre of business and technological innovation, a city that's reinvented itself as a world leader in life sciences, precision medicine, quantum and space technology, the creative industries, fintech, so much more. And we're ready to do a reinvention again. Flourishing partnerships, a strong and growing skills and talent base, ecosystems of cutting-edge firms utilising advanced technology. We already have a highly attractive proposition to investors seeking opportunities in the green economy. COP gives us a platform like no other city has. We know that global firms will want to use the profile of COP to build bigger, stronger and more resilient business spaces. And they need locations that are ready to embrace the necessary changes, places that provide confidence in their investments and make them certain of faster economic and indeed social returns. They can have a critical role in the development of a more modern economy, but they'll need the surety that the foundations and willingness are in place for their investments to deliver. Glasgow has to make sure the world knows that we are that place. None of this, of course, is to neglect the opportunities for our Indigenous business base, whose model isn't necessarily about changing the world, but for whom the world is changing. For those businesses, it's about adapting to a rapidly changing context, about planning for what Glasgow is going to look like in the next decade and the opportunities emerging from that. We're going to see more businesses online, fewer vehicles in our city and local town centres, which are, of course, already in a state of structural flux. This is the context that our business sector here in Glasgow and indeed globally will be working within over the next 10 to 20 years. And the need to adapt also provides new possibilities for business growth through responding to the changing expectations of a customer base. I want to close by returning to the social equity agenda that I referred to earlier. This new green economy and its transformational impact requires us to make sure that our citizens have the skills and the training and the wherewithal that they require to maximise the opportunities available to them. In the very near future, really starting right now, we have to identify the needs of that new economy and ensure that, unlike 40 years ago, when our last transition was so disastrous for so many of our communities and so many workers in this city, we know where our workforce is going and we're putting the structures and the pathways in place to allow them to get there. For example, how do we train the many thousands of skilled workers that are going to be needed for that huge programme of building retrofitting? The engineers that are going to be required for new heating systems, the young people with the STEM skills to take our economy and our society forward. And it's vital that our focus is also on the 46-year-old diesel engine mechanic or gas boiler installer as much as it is on the 16-year-old who's already emerging into a smart and sustainable world. Also, that our existing business bases that will have to adapt, we need to ensure they too have the right people with the right skills. This stuff is absolutely the core of what a just transition means for our people in Glasgow. Get this wrong and we repeat the mistakes of a past that is still hanging over us today. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak this morning. As the weeks and months progress, we will have many opportunities to discuss our Get Ready Glasgow campaign, to delve deeper into specific areas of opportunity and ensure that these are communicated to businesses right across the city. We really do have an opportunity here which makes us the envy of our peers around the world. Believe me, Mayor Andy Burnham has said as much directly to my face just how jealous he is, and he's not the only one. We've got an opportunity to deliver for Glasgow to set us on a more modern, more prosperous, more sustainable and more equitable path. Our window might be relatively small, but the potential and the opportunity is huge. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Susan. And gosh, a great deal in that. I've taken away 5 messages. The role of cities being so important. Nations commit, cities deliver. Secondly, that COP26 needs to be relevant to people, and we've already got a Glasgow message on social equity. Thirdly, that private finance capital will be important in delivering projects that you're working up as for a green investment prospectus, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Fourthly, that we're in the process of developing the city as a technological hub, an innovation hub, and that there's a lot of prospect for growth in that. And then finally, that we're also wanting to make sure that we are a hub for green economy skills and that we get that balance right. Excellent. We've got about 20 minutes to have a good discussion. So over to the audience as well to say, please submit your questions. I know there's a few coming in, but I'll kick it off by asking that you mentioned the Green Investment Prospectus and also in international engagement opportunities that come from COP26. Could you tell us a wee bit more about those?
Yeah, so probably a lot of colleagues that are on the call today will have seen the investment prospectuses that our Invest Glasgow team have produced over the years, that we take to MIPIM, for example, and other opportunities for seeking investment. And they're really great, very, very high quality, and they pull together opportunities generally for property development, but not only, and identify sites in the city and the requirements and set out what it is that the city is looking for from particular investment opportunities, whether that be housing or opportunities for retail and leisure or office, Grade A office space. So we've got really good experience in producing this kind of material of a very, very high quality. But the kind of green investment that we're talking about is a bit different. It's not that the existing investment opportunities can't be greened up, if you like, that they can't be made more sustainable. And indeed they are. We know that the development community is looking at low carbon opportunities, whether that's in residential or business build or indeed leisure. But the kind of infrastructure like that I mentioned, like the Clyde Tidal Barrage or heat networks in the city, or one of my favourites, the roof over the M8, which is almost a ready to go project. It's the planning's really all done for that. There are lots of other examples I could give you. They're a bit different to what we've been used to taking to investors before. And sometimes I think the commercial returns aren't quite as obvious. So we all have to think a little bit more creatively, both those of us in the city who are taking those opportunities to investors, but investors themselves. And that's the kind of financial discussions that I was referring to that Bristol and ourselves are leading along with the World Bank and other partners. That's the kind of discussion we're having. How does everyone shift their perspective a bit to think, there's maybe some more thinking around patient capital investment in these kind of infrastructure projects, thinking about how we translate the way that we would usually think about quick commercial returns into what's available from an infrastructure investment. It's the kind of thinking, I suppose, that pension companies have been doing for quite a while, and we need to harness that. So there's a team in the City Council, the Invest Glasgow team, but they're reaching out and working with partners on this. We've just appointed a new green economy manager, in fact, within the council, to give us some of the expertise and the skills that we kind of thought we didn't quite have within our incredibly talented Invest Glasgow team. That was something that we thought nobody had really dealt with these kinds of issues before. So we've skilled up and we're putting together this prospectus. And the aim is to be able to go to global investors and say, here's a project. And it's not a pie in the sky thing. It's not something that we're kind of, this could be something that works. This is investable in now. and indeed, it's deliverable very, very quickly. We know what needs to happen. We know what the returns will be, both for the city, but also for you as an investor, and for your shareholders, or for your pensioners, whoever it is that's relevant in that context. So it's about having real clarity, making the interventions that we need to deliver this COP transition investable propositions, this carbon zero transition rather. And some of that involves also thinking at a much bigger scale than we've ever done before, because this isn't millions of pounds that we're talking about, it's billions and multiple billions. And what's become very clear in the discussions is that the investors that are looking to cities like Glasgow are looking for opportunities of that scale. Something like say a heat network, a district heating network for the entire city centre, which is one of the things that we're looking at. A possible estimate of cost there would be in the region of something like $250 million. That's the low end of what these global investors are looking for. So what we also need to do is talk to partners, to peer cities. So places like Manchester and Bristol, for example, and Edinburgh, dare I say it, of course, to create shared opportunities, so that the things that we all have to do, because we've got this in common with all other cities, we all have to change the way that we heat buildings. We all have to decarbonise transport. We can do that collectively and scale up our individual propositions to something that is not only incredibly attractive to investors, but is transformational and will deliver on the targets, national and global targets, that we've all set ourselves, much more quickly, really accelerate progress towards those. So I hope that makes sense.
Thanks very much. And that goes some way towards answering the question that Gary Bernstein was asking about example propositions that will feature in the Green Investment Prospectus. So district heating systems being one that you've highlighted there. I presume the metro is a possibility for that as well, because we have very ambitious
absolutely. It is absolutely, yes, and I should have mentioned that one. It's an absolutely brilliant example, in fact, of exactly the kind of thing that investors are looking at. And I'll not name them, but this is a compliment to you as well, Stuart. But not long after the connectivity, the second Connectivity Commission report was published, which had the proposition for Metro in it, I met with the managing director, the operational director of a major global firm who had come over from the United States to talk to us in Glasgow, and he came in clutching a copy of the Connectivity Commission and said, how can we get involved in this? Now at that stage, I'll be perfectly honest, we didn't really have a clear answer for him. We hadn't thought through at that point. We knew why we needed a metro from a kind of macro economic argument, and certainly from the social and connectivity arguments, we understood why we needed this transport system for the Glasgow metropolitan region, why we needed this investment. But we hadn't thought through to the extent of, okay, how does the private sector, how does a global investor actually be part of this? That's the work that we're doing now. And the next time I have that conversation, I'll be able to, hopefully be able to say, this is how you can be part of this. This is the bit that you could really help us invest in. This is the expertise that you can bring to this intervention.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. I've got a couple of questions here. Now, this will not be unfamiliar to you. There are a lot of folks wondering what exactly the COP26 event will look like in practice, what the physical embodiment of COP26 is going to look like. Here's Janet Martin, who a colleague at Royal Bank of Scotland, who has asked, much in the press around whether COP26 will go ahead as in person or not. Does Councillor Aiken have any insights on that?
Yes, I will echo what Alok said earlier. We are absolutely committed to an in-person COP26 going ahead. Now, there are not caveats within that, but there are layers within that, in that the COP is not just the negotiations, the blue zone where the negotiations take place. There's also the green zone, which is the part where the business sector, where companies and also civil society have their place. That's the bit that's going to be in the Science Centre in Glasgow. And then there's what I've been calling kind of Green Zone Plus, the ancillary COP, which will take place in the rest of the city. Conversations and engagements between all manner of organisations from every single sector you can imagine, just engaging with this opportunity. A lot of that, I think, will be hybrid. And in actual fact, I think that even if there were certainty about all of that being able to go ahead, the organisations who are coming to the city are going to embrace the opportunities offered by this technology we're using today anyway, because they've realised that it allows them to reach much, much bigger audiences and potentially have speakers as well who don't necessarily physically have to be in the city. So I think there'll be all sorts of things going on, both online combinations of in-person and online, but the negotiations themselves in the blue zone, in the SEC, those we are absolutely committed to being in person. And there are a whole number of reasons for that, but actually the overwhelming reason, and the most important one, is that the nations in the global south, the governments there, the countries that are most suffering loss and damage from climate change right now, the loss of life, the loss of livelihood, are sceptical, and rightly so, I think, that if they're not in the room, able to look the leaders of the big polluting nations and the big money nations in the whites of the eyes and say, you need to step up. We're not the country causing the emissions, but we are the countries that are suffering, and you have to deliver on that. They are absolutely certain that that needs to happen in person, and that they need to have the opportunity to look, whether it's the President of the United States, whether it's the Prime Minister of the UK, whoever it is, they are saying, we need this to happen in person. We need to be in the same room. So for that kind of global climate justice reason, if nothing else, we're committed to it being in person, but there are a whole lot of other reasons why it's a good thing that those blue zone negotiations will actually physically happen here in Glasgow in November.
Do you have a sense of a time for when the announcement might be made about the final format for COP26?
So the COVID review of the structures of COP is drawing to a close just now. The public health directors and chief medical officers of both England and Scotland have been working very closely together, coming up with a public health protocol for COP and how it will operate and how it will be safe from a public health point of view and a COVID point of view. That is close to completion. Our expectation at the moment is early June, so not far away at all. And that will also allow us to launch the Get Ready Glasgow campaign, that brand that we've used previously for the European Championships in 2018, and of course the Commonwealth Games. That will allow us to tell the city, citizens and businesses what they can expect in November.
Great stuff. Now, I've got a couple of questions, in fact, several questions from the audience asking about how smaller businesses, SMEs, can get involved with COP and with the initiatives that you're outlining. Adam Bastock, for example, Jacqueline Law from Seapony Limited, asking questions about whether there's going to be exhibition opportunities or chances for companies to show what it is that they are capable of achieving. Do you see opportunities for Glasgow small and medium-sized businesses to get involved in COP?
Yes, definitely. So the green zone is probably not a space for SMEs. It's very much on a global scale, but we have agreed there's going to be a couple of buildings in the city centre given over to the Scottish Government, the GOMA and the Lighthouse, and they will run Scotland Scotland Green Expo, COP Expo, if you like. And we, as the host city, are saying to the Scottish Government, we need to make sure that there is a Glasgow space in that. There will also be a Glasgow space in the Green Zone as well. So there will be opportunities there. And we're still planning for its early stages of planning of what that Glasgow space is going to be used for. There will also be a Glasgow space in the Blue Zone. This is the joy of being the host city, that we get into the Blue Zone as well, which most cities will not be able to do. But yes, I think there will be multiple opportunities, and more will be created. And indeed, the City Council and the COP team at the City Council will work really closely with yourselves at the Chamber, and with organisations like FSB, for example, to make sure that city businesses are able to maximise that opportunity. And I'll maybe just mention in passing, and I know that Guy Jefferson from Scottish Power is on one of your panels later, and he'll probably talk about this in more detail. But the Sustainable Glasgow Board, which has a range of partners from different sectors, which I chair, and the Chamber is represented on that. But the Green Investment Hub of that delivery hub, which Guy chairs, has developed a green business charter, and the Guy has worked very hard to make sure that that is accessible to SMEs, that it isn't just big businesses, but the SMEs are going to be able to sign up to that, be able to demonstrate their progress at the pace and scale that is appropriate for them as well, so that they are not left out of these discussions too. But I'm sure there'll be more discussion about that later on in the day.
That's excellent. My favourite in this list of questions around SME involvements from Chris Newlands of Spelfie, who's asking, who do we speak to capture the COP26 event from space to allow the world to participate safely from every corner of the planet?
I can't pretend to have the answer to that off the top of my head. I wish I knew. So the person I always lump up for these things is our COP relationship manager in the council, our stakeholder manager, Duncan Booker, who is magnificent and is covering a whole number of bases and talking to every organisation you can imagine, from the smallest SME or third sector charity to the Bloomberg Foundation. But I'm not sure he's able to do space just yet. But what I would say is, if you've got a question about the host city capacity in COP and what our plans are and how you can engage, Duncan Booker at Glasgow City Council is your first port of call, with the usual City Council email address. And if he isn't able to answer the question, he may well be able to direct you to someone who can.
Thank you very much indeed. And I would also agree that if Chris wants to contact us as well at the Chamber of Commerce, we'll help make the connection with Duncan and his team. One very final question from Donald Herlihy. What would be needed for governments at all levels to increase by 10 times their investment in active travel infrastructure?
A commitment and political will. I think that's what's required, and I suppose the willingness to have some difficult conversations about the transitioning of the use of space, particularly in an urban setting. And I think we are doing that in Glasgow. Scottish Government's made a commitment. I think it has already reached 10% of transport investment in active travel. I think everyone can see the way that Glasgow has transformed over the past decade, but actually over the past year particularly, and that's an ongoing thing. That's not going to reverse. It's not going to go backwards. What we are doing right now, in fact, is engaging with people about the Spaces for People interventions that we made during the past year, which were driven initially by public health concerns, first and foremost by public health concerns, and the desire to, as we emerged from lockdown, the first lockdown last summer, give people confidence to be able to return to just living in the city safely from a public health point of view. That now is transitioning into this is the way that the modern city is going to look. More space for people walking, wheeling and cycling. So those interventions, which were by their nature temporary interventions because they were done under the COVID emergency regulations, we're now consulting with the city about how we transition those into just the way that the modern city looks, how we improve on the work that was by necessity done very quickly. But this is the direction of travel. Whenever you talk about transport and travel, you always end up using puns inadvertently. But this is the direction of travel, is active travel for the city and right across Scotland. I think the commitments of the Scottish government in the manifesto were considerable. So the job, I suppose, of people like the questioner is to hold them to that, make sure that they deliver on those commitments, and indeed that we deliver on our commitments in Glasgow.
That's super. Thanks very much indeed, Susan. That brings our session to a close. Our thanks to Susan, to James and to Alok for their contributions so far. We're going to take a short break for a cup of tea, perhaps. We'll kind of come back at 9:55, so we're getting a 3-minute break here. When we return, we're going to meet the UK government's net zero business champion, Andrew Griffith MP. So back in 3 minutes.